Hey, welcome back to this tutorial series. This is Lyndon with MotionArray.com. Glad you guys are watching part 2. We're going to have fun today. For those of you who don't know, we're creating this complex light streak intro. It's definitely a pretty advanced project, but that makes it all the more exciting. Anyway, in part 1, we went over the animation and scene setup, and while that may not be exciting as this glowing, colorful tutorial, we definitely covered a lot of knowledge that will help bring you to the next level in understanding complex animation projects and how you can actively construct them. So here in part 2, where everything is cookies and cream and glowing visuals, let's just have some fun. But we definitely will be learning some rad tricks, and hopefully it'll give you guys some new ideas for your projects and how you can be creative in them. And also, we will be using 2 different third-party plugins, Superluminal Stardust and Optical Flares. Okay, so we're here in After Effects. This is where we left off. We have the motion of these lights, and also this camera is moving through space. Yeah, so the whole scene is moving through space. So basically our goal is to try to create light streaks that come from these lights. It's going to leave behind a trail, a light streak trail. So like I said earlier, we're going to be using a plugin called Stardust. We got to apply the Stardust to a layer. So we'll hit Control Y and we'll call this streak. So let's be sure to place this layer under the camera, because we don't want to change the layer index of the camera, because the layer index defines the random seed of the wiggle, and we have this camera motion, all the wiggles set up just like we want it. So let's be sure not to mess it up by changing the layer index of the camera. So let's apply Stardust to this streak layer. So first of all, let's change this type from point to light. Alright, so the particles will now emit from the light. And apparently these lights are really close to the camera, so it makes the particles look big. We can easily fix this. First I'll turn the speed down to 0, and then I'll change the particle size to maybe like 0.5. There we go. Maybe you guys get what's going on here. So if you remember from the last tutorial, we animated the motion of the scene, or how fast these lights are moving through space, with this null object that everything's parented to. So if we go to the position, we did this with an expression, but we can easily change the speed that this Z position is changing by changing the value that time is multiplied by. So let's do like 130. So now it's going to move a lot faster, and the camera is going to whiz by these streaks faster. So you can see here what happens if we increase the value. If we do 150, you see the camera and the lights are moving through space faster. If we do less, like 75, then it's going to be moving much slower. So let's do like 130 for this particular situation. It depends on how close the lights are to the camera. Okay, let's go back to our streak layer and let's increase the particles per second. So let's just increase this times 100. So there's a lot of particles, so it's a solid streak. Also, it might be a good idea to add some feather to these particles. So I'll go to the particle properties, and we have particle feather. There we go. That makes the streak a little smoother. And we can also bring down the particle life so that we don't have to render unnecessary particles. So let's do like 1.5. That should be fine. And also the opacity over life. If we go to the particle over life, let's go to the opacity and just bring this down. So maybe to make sure there's no sharp ends. But we can even bring this down to 1 second, and still the streaks stay in camera. Alright, looking really good so far. Alright, so if you'll notice in the original example, not only did we have a streak, but the streak was like more complex. It had like more streaks and more details. Let's think about how we're going to do that. What I'm going to do is duplicate this streak, so we have 2 streak layers now. And on this streak copy, I'm going to change the direction of the emitter to directional. And then I'm going to increase the speed just a little bit, so maybe 5. And then I'm going to turn the direction span all the way down to 0. There we go. You can see we got kind of a copy. And here's where the creativity could completely diverge. You could end up with a completely different, unique result. But I'll be showing you guys at least one creative result you can come up with. So the way I had it in the original example is that this second streak was swirling around the first one. And I thought that came up with a pretty cool result. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start out by changing the size. So instead of 0.5, let's do 0.25. And then let's go to the speed over life and turn this all the way down. So not only is there positive motion, but it goes all the way back to negative motion. So it displaces from the original stream and it goes back in somewhere behind the camera. If we change the orient Z, this streak's going to be on a different side of the original streak. But if we animate it, then it's going to swirl around. So I think that's pretty cool. Let's do that with an expression. Let's hold alternate and click the orient Z parameter. And then we want this to change throughout time. So we'll do time times maybe 720. So it's going to swirl around 2 times each second. So it's going to swirl around the original streak. I think that's pretty cool. Let's do a little faster. Let's do like 920. There we go. I love it. And just to add more complexity, more awesomeness, let's duplicate this swirling streak and let's just make a variation of it. So first off, let's change the orient Z expression. You can make it a little bit faster, so maybe 1500, something like that. And also, let's just add a random value to make it start in a different place, so it doesn't matter. And also, I'll probably change the speed. You could probably get all kind of different cool results if you change the speed, but I'm gonna bring it down, keep everything pretty narrow. So let's do about 3. Sweet, looking really cool. We got this complex light streak. It looks kind of like electricity. It's just got a lot of detail. I think it looks really cool. Anyway, if you play around with these techniques, you could probably come up with some really cool results, and that's mostly what tutorials are about anyway, just inspiring new ideas and new tools for being creative. So anyway, the next thing we created was these small turbulent particles. And these add a really nice variation to the effect. And one mindset that's been really helpful for me when creating particle simulations and all that stuff is to mix different types of particles and different types of shapes and substances. So, for example, we have some streaks here, but we also want to add some turbulent particles. And it just creates for a really complex result when really it's just 2 or 3 different types of particles. So, there's no right way to do it. You just imagine some kind of different type of particles and try to create it and see how it turns out. So what I'm going to do is create a new solid, and I'll call this turbulent particles, and we'll go ahead and apply stardust to this layer also. So for the emitter type, we can't choose the lights because we have to have a spherical emitter because we have to have this direction as outwards, and that doesn't work with points or lights. So we've got to do something a little more complicated, but this is really useful information, so just pay attention. You'll really benefit from this. So what I will do is open the position parameters from the motion and also the red streak. We'll do the red streak for now. So I'm going to add an expression to the origin XY of the emitter. And let's hover our mouse over the composition, hit tilde so it opens it up. And on the origin XY of the emitter, I'm going to grab the pick whip and choose position X. Now since we separated these parameters, it's going to do something a little bit weird. And this is a little bit difficult to explain. We don't really have time, but if you don't know what's going on, just kind of follow along a little bit. So we're going to get rid of X position, just change this to position. And since this is an array defining these 2 values, we want this to be the X value of the position, which is 0. And we'll also do square brackets 1 for the Y value. So basically it gets the red streak position X that defines this value and the red streak position Y for this value. But now we have to remember that this red streak is parented to the motion. So there's actually extra motion going on with this red streak that's not actually in these parameters information. So what we have to do is plus, on the X value we have to plus the X value of the motion because this red streak is parented to the motion. And for the Y value we have to plus the Y value of the motion because this red streak is parented to the motion. Now also for the Z value, let's add an expression. Let's pick whip the Z position of the red streak, and also let's plus the Z position of the motion. Again, since the red streak is parented to the motion. So these position parameters on the motion do affect the position of this red streak. So now we should have this emitter linked to the position of that light. But now we're given the freedom to change this to a spherical emitter. And since this camera is so close to these lights, you can see what's going on here. It's just a huge spherical emitter. We gotta turn this way down. So let's just turn this to 1 for now so we can see what's going on. Let's turn the speed all the way down to 0 for now. So there we go. So one thing good to keep in mind when trying to make good turbulent structures is that turbulent structures don't work well when we're trying to display something 3-dimensional. We get the sharpest, cleanest, most detailed turbulent structure when we're displacing a plane rather than a three-dimensional shape. That means we need this sphere to not be a sphere but a circle, a two-dimensional circle. So it leaves behind a plane of particles, not a tube of particles. Hopefully that makes sense. So what we'll do is change the size X all the way down to 0. So let's look at this from our active camera. And let's also turn the particle sizes down. And let's bring the number of particles up, maybe times 100. So you can see here now that we have a plane of particles. And now I want to increase the speed. So I actually want this to look like it's emitting from a point, but I also want it to spread out into a plane. So here's how we're going to do that. Let's turn the size Y down to about 0.15 and the size Z down to about 0.5. So it's basically emitting from a point. But what we have the ability to do is change the direction from uniform to outwards. And the outwards direction will allow these particles to emit in a specific direction defined by the sphere, the shape of the sphere. That's going to allow us to be able to displace this in a good turbulent structure. So this is kind of complicated, but hopefully you guys are following along. You may have to rewatch this, but once we actually start adding turbulence, it'll be clear. So let's go ahead and increase the speed to about 15. And you can see there's this plane. It's not a tube, it's a plane. Okay, so how we want this to work is for the particles to shoot out into a plane and go back into a point. So we go to the speed over life, and we can completely reverse this motion by making the particles by the end of their life have reverse motion. And then also we can shorten the life of these particles to about 0.75, and then it'll happen sooner. So let's increase the speed. There we go. Now we have this good structure ready to start adding turbulence to. And I'd like for you guys to see the difference in adding turbulence to a plane structure like this and adding turbulence to like a tube. The turbulence is blended together, and we can't see the defined turbulent shape. But here we're going to see it clearly. So let's go ahead and add a turbulence node, and we'll apply this. We'll attach this to the particle, and let's go ahead and turn up position offset to about 15. And then let's turn the noise scale down to about 25. And then we need to mess with the turbulence over life. So we'll open this parameter and let's make the turbulence go down towards the beginning of its life, and then up, and then it actually needs to go back down as it kind of re-emerges back with the streak. So let's change this to Bezier so it's smooth. Yeah, so something like this. And now to make the turbulence of this more clearly defined, let's add more particles. So let's add another 0 like that, and then we'll turn down the opacity of these particles to about 15. And then the size can go down a little bit, so maybe 1.5. And also let's add some particle feather, maybe like 50. There we go, we've got this really interesting turbulent shape. Now let's click a clear point here and let's mess with the turbulence to make it just how we want it. So first of all, I don't like the sharp ending here. So a way we can fix this is going to the emitter speed random and just changing this so that it blends a little better. That should help. And let's increase the position offset, see if that helps. Okay, looks good. Now let's turn down the speed over life like this. We don't want it to shoot out too far. Let's keep it pretty close. Keep it pretty close to the streak. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Now let's turn down the size of this turbulence, so maybe 15. And let's turn down the position amount. Alright, so now I'll probably increase the amplitude. Alright, so I think that looks pretty cool. So here are my final settings for the turbulence. The position offset was 20, the noise scale was also 20, I have the noise amplitude set to 100, and all the rest of them are the same. So we have this cool turbulence, and this is going to look cool blended with the light streaks. So I'll go ahead and turn off the solo, and yeah, that looks pretty cool. Anyway, we got this pretty interesting result. So I'm going to add one more type of particle to this effect, and this will be pretty simple. Let's go ahead and do it pretty fast. So we'll call this sparks. These are going to be kind of more larger particles. Let's go ahead and apply Stardust to this. We'll change the emitter type from point to light. Bring the size of the particles down. Give it some particle feather. Let's bring the speed down. Let's turn up the speed random. Let's bring the particle size down even more. Let's turn up the size random. That's pretty important. Let's do about 50. Let's go to over life. Let's go to size over life and make this kind of flicker out. So let's do like this. Change this to Bezier, then we'll change it to draw, I'll make it kind of flicker out so these particles kind of have some flicker involved like that. And I'll also just add a turbulence node to this and connect to the particles, change the turbulence over life, turn up the particle offset, and turn down the noise scale to about 50. Just make sure and preview that, make sure it's not too chaotic. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You can probably turn down the particle life to about 1 second. Life random, let's give that 25. Alright, also it's probably good to add motion blur to these. So let's go to the render settings, let's go to the motion blur, turn this on, and let's bring it down. Let's not do much motion blur, let's do about 45. Let's blend this in. There we go, we've got some large particles to blend with the rest of the effect. Alright, so now it's about colorizing. Now how do we colorize these individually? So let's go to the project window here, and we're going to duplicate this twice. So we'll do it once and do it twice. We'll call this one red, and we'll call this one blue. So let's go inside the red composition, and basically what we're going to do is delete the blue streak. Alright, so everything's going to magnet to the red. That was easy enough. Then we'll go to the blue, and we'll actually delete the red streak, and everything goes chaotic, but we'll rename this blue streak to red streak. And then everything links back up because it thinks this is the original red streak. And now that everything's linked back up, we can rename this to blue streak. Boom, it's weird how that works, isn't it? So now the blue streak works perfectly. Okay, so now let's colorize these. So let's start with the blue streak, I guess, doesn't really matter. And we'll add an adjustment layer, but let's not change the index of the camera, remember that. Let's add an adjustment layer, Control Alternate Shift Y. We'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. Let's call this Color. First, let's apply a solid composite effect because there is transparency and we can't color with transparency, so add a solid composite effect. Make this black. We'll start out with a curves adjustment. Let's bring up the blue, turn down the red to leave some of those cyans in there. And we want a little more green for the highlights and a little less green for the shadows. Add some color contrast. Okay, looks pretty good. And we want more color to be in these light streaks. We got to turn their opacity down a little bit, so we can actually go to the original light streak and just turn its opacity down to where there's a little bit of color. There we go. We can see some color kind of around the edges. That's good. And we can do this for the other light streaks as well. The particle feather all the way up and turn down the opacity. Anyway, back to the colorization. Let's go ahead and add our first glow effect. So we'll type in glow because we definitely want, some glow, right? This is like glow territory. Let's turn the glow threshold down to about 25, and we'll increase the radius to about 25 as well. And let's change colors from colors A and B. Let's do A is greater than B. For color B, let's do like more of a blue. And for color A, we'll move it towards the cyans. Alright, and let's turn the glow operation to screen. Alright, there's our first glow effect. Let's duplicate this glow. We'll turn the threshold up to about 50. Let's increase the radius to about 100. And that seems pretty good. Let's make another duplication of this. And we'll increase the radius to about 250. Alright, looking pretty good. So I'll turn the glow threshold maybe back to 25 for this large one. And maybe we'll kind of increase the intensity for these. So maybe for this one we'll do about 1.3. This one 1.2, doesn't matter. This one 1.4. And let's add one more glow effect. Turn this to screen. Let's do about 75 so it gets only the highlights. Let's do A is greater than B. Let's do our own custom colors again. And then, so we really do want a lot of glow in this effect. And we can see before and after. Looks so much better with that glow. So let's go ahead and copy this color and glow. We'll paste this to the other effect. And we just got to change the colors around. So we'll actually bring the blue down and the red up for this one. And we'll change these colors. So we'll make this one more orange. Make this one a little closer to yellow. And we'll full screen this and just choose those colors. Alright, that looks pretty sweet. Now we've got a blue streak and a red streak. So now we got to combine these two effects together. So let's go back in our original light streak comp. Let's get rid of all these stardust layers. And let's drag in those blue and red streaks. And we'll do screen blending modes. There we go. That's looking pretty luscious. That's looking pretty awesome. The last really big thing we need to do is add these lens flares. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new solid. Let's go ahead and get that knocked out of the way. Let's call this red flare. And I'll apply optical flares. So this is the second and final third-party plugin we're going to use. There's no really built-in option for After Effects that will substitute for this. After Effects has a lot of powerful tools within itself, but sometimes there are tools that third-party plugins offer that After Effects just simply does not have. So the flare I used, see if I can find it. This cool flare here, and it looks pretty cool, but we need to change a few things. First off, we don't want these counter motion elements here, so we'll go through and turn these off. Let's hide that. Let's hide this. Let's turn this down. Maybe we'll keep some of that. Just turn it down. Let's hide this. Let's turn this down. We'll hide that actually. Let's delete some of these horizontal elements. We'll turn some of them down, but others we'll just get rid of. Alright, this is looking much better. Also, I want to add a few custom elements. So let's go to Lens Objects. I'll add another glow. Make it a little wider. Something like that. Turn down the brightness maybe. Also, let's change this global color to like more like white. Hit OK. Also, I'll add a spike ball and kind of stretch this horizontally as well. And just scale down. Yeah, something like that. So we got this pretty cool flare. Let's go ahead and hit OK. We'll turn the brightness down to about 40. Hopefully that looks pretty good. Yep. And we want to add some flicker. So for the speed, we'll do about 75 amount. Let's do about 40. We got some nice flicker in there. Now it's time to position this light flare where these 3D lights are. Now, that seems a little difficult to somehow convert 3D position into a 2D plane. Well, there's an expression we can use for that. Let's go to the position XY, hold alternate, click the stopwatch to add an expression. This is kind of weird what we're going to do, but it's really awesome and it works pretty well. So what we're going to do is grab the pick whip, actually choose the layer of the 3D object. So the red streak here. So we actually just chose the layer, not any parameter inside the layer. And then we type dot to comp with a capital C, and then we do parentheses, and inside the parentheses we do an array. So we do square brackets, then we do 2 commas. Now we can put some, just whatever value for the array. But let's just do 0, 0, 0. So there we go. Check this out. That pretty simple expression there is going to convert that 3D motion into a 2-dimensional coordinates, and it's going to make this lens flare be exactly where that light is. I think that's pretty awesome. Now we can colorize this, so we'll add a tint effect, and we'll also add curves, and we can screen this in. Looks pretty sweet. Let's turn this down to about 35. Let's make the right amount of contrast. We don't want it to be like ketchup mustard or anything, but add a little contrast to the orange hue. Alright, so let's do the same thing for the blue flare. We just go to the expression here, hit EE, that opens expressions. We just turn this to blue streak. And then we can colorize this appropriately, so do like this. And also let's add some random seed to the flicker. Okay, there we go. Man, all these glowing particles and everything are just nutrition to my soul. But other than that, there are a few last things we do need to do. At the collision here, these two lights are at the same point, so actually, since the red and blue are duplicates as far as structure, they're going to be in the same position. I think we need to fix that. So we're going to go here into the blue light streak and just make some changes so these swirls are not in the same position as the red swirls. So what we'll do is click these two and go to the expression by hitting EE, and just make some random changes. So maybe just change the value here a little bit, just like that. So you can see here they're now no longer in the same exact swirled position. And we also want to do the same thing for the sparks, because you can see here that the sparks are roughly in the same position. So we'll click on the sparks here, go down to the emitter effect, and change the random seed. Just like that. Alright, now at collision we want these lens flares to go away. So this is pretty simple. All we have to do is do a simple keyframe animation. Okay, so we'll go right at the collision here. We'll start out with the red flare. We'll add a keyframe to the optical flare brightness, and let's just go forward a few frames and turn the brightness all the way down to 0. Alright, and we can do the same exact thing for the blue flare. Copy this animation and just paste it here on the blue flare. Alright, you can see here something weird's happening in the middle. There's this black spot, and that's because we're in 32 bits per channel. So sometimes a little bit of weird things can happen like that, but we can easily fix this by getting rid of the 32-bit per channel data. So all we have to do is add just any effect that doesn't support 32 bits per channel. You'll know that by this little icon here. It means it doesn't support 32 bits per channel, and then it'll get rid of any of those 32-bit problems. Working in 32 bits per channel has a lot of advantages, and I really recommend it, exploring the different advantages. But also you can run into problems. But if you ever do run into a problem, it's no problem. You can just add an effect like this, and it'll get rid of all the 32-bit per channel data for that particular layer. So next we need to make the particle emission stop at collision. We need to make these particles all fade away in a visually pleasing dynamic fashion. We just don't want to take down the opacity. That would be very sorry and unprofessional. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into one of these streak compositions, and we're going to start making some keyframes. So we'll start with these two layers here, the swirling streaks, and we'll go actually a half a second before the collision. We'll add a keyframe to the particle opacity, that is on both layers. And let's hit U to open up these keyframes. Then let's go after the collision a little bit. We'll turn this opacity all the way down to 0. And then we'll select both of those end keyframes, hit F9, and that'll make it an easy ease transition. So we can kind of view what's going on here. Just fades out nice and clean. And actually also we'll do the same exact animation for the primary streak. We'll go back to this keyframe, hit Control V. It'll paste on the right parameter. So we'll see how that looks. Yeah, that'll be pretty good. That looks pretty good. Alright, so now that we got those animations taken care of, let's go to the turbulence. Now this is going to be a little more complex, but it still shouldn't be a problem. So we'll also go about a half a second before the collision, and we'll go to the particle opacity as well, add a keyframe. Go just before the collision, and then we'll turn the opacity all the way down to 0. Now what we're actually going to do is duplicate this, and we're going to make a new turbulence, some new turbulent particles fade in. So we'll go to this frame, actually make it 0, and go to the next frame and make it 5, and make the opacity a value of 5. So these particles actually fade in and replace the other ones. So the advantage of doing this is so that we can customize the look of the turbulent particles here at the end without affecting the perfect look we have during the action of the animation. So the main adjustments I want to make are turning down the life, because we don't want these particles to get too close to the camera. So we'll turn this down to about 0.55 for this particular example. And I want to go to the over life, make this size fade out just like that, so there won't be any choppy ends. And remember, I do want this to fade out, so let's go a few keyframes after that last keyframe. We'll turn the opacity all the way down to 0. And let's select all these last keyframes, hit F9 so it's a smooth animation. Possibly move this a little more this way. And I want this little fish tail to come in sooner. So what I'll do is go to the emitter speed over life. I'll bring this down so there's a little more negative motion. And that's going to cause a little bit more of that fishtail look. Alright, and we can turn the speed in general down. I think it looks pretty cool. Alright, I really like that. So we just want to find creative ways to make each one of these elements integrate out of existence in a creative way. And with these sparks, we could probably just do a simple particle per second animation. Turn it all the way down to 0, keyframe. So the exact same process we did to make these blue elements fade out, we'll do the same exact thing for the red streaks and particle elements. Look at all those elements blended together. It just creates this really cool, complex nebula. It's self-explanatory. You get the picture. It's really cool. This just turned out really aesthetic and detailed. Man, I love this stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed creating all these cool visuals and just diving a little into the creativity and different techniques. I've definitely had fun. Be sure to check out the website motionarray.com. Loads and loads of unique, really awesome templates that artists from all different skill levels can really benefit from. Saving time, effort, even money for those in the field. And also, it's a really efficient way of jump-starting your project or even creativity. Oh, and this next tutorial, part 3, is probably going to cover even more visual effects knowledge and content than this tutorial. Tons of exciting effects we're going to have a blast creating. My name is Lyndon, and I hope to see you there.